I want to let you guys in on a little secret, so come here, all right? One of the biggest misconceptions about quitting porn is that it's primarily a process of sexual self-denial, okay? Guys think that quitting porn and masturbation is all about getting these sexual impulses under control. And while there's obviously an element of this, the full truth is actually much more nuanced, which brings us to today's topic, the 3 types of cravings for porn, okay? And we're gonna learn how to understand, identify, and overcome these 3 different types of craving, all right? Because through my years of work helping countless guys kick their porn habits, I've come to realize that there are very big distinctions between the types of cravings that you will experience. You will come to see that there are sexual cravings, chemical cravings, and emotional cravings. Guys think that they can't quit porn because they're just so horny all the time. You know, they think that they're dealing with sexual cravings, but in reality, most guys are actually hung up on those other 2 types of cravings, the chemical cravings and the emotional cravings. Understanding the difference between these types of cravings is truly essential knowledge for any guy who wants to quit porn for good. Otherwise, you'll be stuck using the wrong strategy for the particular type of craving you're dealing with, which will lead to just way more discomfort and way more relapses. For a lot of guys, this info can lead to massive breakthroughs on your ability to leave porn behind for good. So let's get into it. So we'll start off by just doing an overview of the 3 types, okay? So to start things off, we've got your sexual cravings, which are exactly what you would think. They arise from your natural desire for sex, and they lead you to wanting to use porn as a substitute for the real thing. Next, you have chemical cravings, and these are a bit different, okay? These are cravings that are just triggered by addiction pathways built up in your brain. It's similar to how you would crave nicotine, caffeine, or any other drug that your body has gotten used to consuming. You might have zero desire for real sexual connection, but you could still have a massive addictive chemical drive to fire up porn for a boost of easy stimulation. And then finally, we have emotional cravings, okay? Emotional cravings are all about making painful emotions disappear. Stress, boredom, worry, loneliness, fear, insecurity, you name it. All of these unpleasant emotions can be instantly obliterated by porn, at least for a little bit, right? So now that we know what the different types are, we need to learn how to identify what type of craving we're dealing with in the moment. Because like I said before, if you're using the wrong strategy for a particular craving, not only will it make it harder to stay clean, it can even make the cravings worse, okay? So let's start identifying these things. And we're gonna start with chemical cravings. You can be confident that it's a chemical craving when you don't really have any true desire for actual sex, all right? Like there's not a drive to go and actually connect with a woman. And you also don't have any kind of stress or negative emotions that you're trying to run away from. All right. And typically these chemical cravings, they pass in 5 to 15 minutes. Now, that's just kind of like a rule of thumb. If you're coming from a period of very high frequency usage, like using porn every day or multiple times a day, you might have clusters where, it lasts a bit longer and these things come more frequently. But once you get past the 2 to 3 week mark, this 5 to 15 minute rule really holds for most guys. Now, if you've got a craving that seems to just go nonstop for hours, well, that's typically a sign that you're dealing with an emotional craving, all right? And the reason for this is that this type of craving isn't just tied to chemical fluctuations triggered by addictive pathways in the brain. It's tied to some kind of negative emotion that's floating around in the back of your psyche. So what if you're unsure? You're like, is this a chemical craving? Is this an emotional craving? Is this a sexual craving? Like, is there a way that I can test specifically for these emotional kinds of cravings? And yes, there is. I've come up with a little test that you can use to see if you're dealing with an emotional craving. All right, here's how it works. First thing you're going to want to do is imagine committing yourself to going the rest of the day without a relapse. Basically, you want to have your brain really consider what it would be like if you were going to not use porn. Okay, put yourself in that state. Okay, you don't even need to actually commit to doing it. You just want to really run that simulation because you want to see how your emotions react. Okay, and the next step then is you want to ask yourself, what kind of emotional state would I be left sitting with. And if you notice any sort of specific unpleasant emotion that's not just a raw chemical itch or pure sexual charge, then this would be your emotional trigger. And the key thing to understand here is that these kinds of cravings can persist until you actually address whatever that core emotion is. So, for example, if your craving is triggered by stress at work, that craving can last as long as that stress is present. So if you tend to reach a point in your reboot where you just find yourself dealing with cravings that last for hours or even days, then you're dealing with an emotional issue. And then finally, you've got your sexual cravings, okay? And these have a very different sort of feel to them. And it's much more about a deep desire and attraction to real women. Think about the feelings you've had about a real life crush, okay? Sexual cravings come from a legitimate desire to find a mate, not just have some kind of chemical release through orgasm. And to be honest, most guys actually have trouble connecting to their authentic sexual desire prior to rebooting from porn, because as soon as real sexual desire comes into their mind, they either instantly pornify it through sexual fantasy and trigger a chemical porn response in their brain, or they feel lonely and deprived, turning it into some sort of emotional craving. And this is especially true if you're someone who tends to seek self-validation through sexual status. Because if you're using sex to compensate, all right, you're not really dealing with a desire for sex. You're dealing for a desire for status, for worth, okay? And that's actually more of an emotional issue than a purely sexual one. So now we've got a bit of a handle on how to identify the craving types. Let's move forward and talk about how to respond to each of them, all right? And we'll start off with the chemical cravings here. And as I said, chemical cravings are just the result of your brain expecting its regular hit of pleasure, and they tend to last 5 to 15 minutes. So if you're dealing with a chemical craving, all you got to do is get through that itchy period and you will be fine, okay? And there's two pieces to pulling this off, the practical and the mental. So on the practical side, you just got to distract yourself. You got to put yourself in a position where you won't use porn because you're doing something else. You could go for a walk or go be around other people, all right? If you got roommates, go hang out with them. You got a family, go down to the living room, all right? You're not going to relapse outdoors or in front of others, so just take the option off the table while the urge passes. And another great option is to just get into any sort of low effort flow state. This could be some basic chore like doing the dishes, or it could be doing something more interesting like reading a book, watching a show, listening to music, etc. All right. Now, to be completely honest, when I quit porn, I played a ton of video games. Was that the optimal strategy? No, but I didn't know everything I do now. But did it work? Yeah, it was, I traded up. I traded something that could be an issue for something that definitely absolutely was an issue. And then once I got through my reboot, I put the gaming in its proper place later once the porn was behind me and my brain was in a healthier place. Something important to note here though is that if you're dealing with a chemical craving, you want to be careful about pushing yourself to be super productive and do hard things, all right? Like this old adage of doing push-ups or math problems when you're, triggered does not work well for chemical cravings. And if you force that kind of stuff on yourself, you're significantly increasing your chances of relapse. And this is one of the big things that I see guys screwing up all the time is that, they have a chemical craving and they just decide, all right, well, I got to go for a run. I got to get down and do 20 push-ups. I got to, snap myself with a rubber band or whatever other kind of things people come up with. That doesn't really help with these kinds of things. All we got to do is get through that craving. We just got to let it pass. And this is where we got to get into the mental game of dealing with chemical cravings, because these, they're something that's going to be frequent and they're going to come up all throughout your rebooting process. All right. And so the first point is that you do not need to try and make these cravings go away. Quitting porn isn't about driving out the addiction, it's about letting it leave. And in order to do that, we need to have the right attitude toward discomfort in this process. First thing is that we want to remember that it's really not that bad. For example, okay, think of the worst physical pain you've ever experienced. All right, if that pain is like a 9 or even 10 out of 10 on the pain scale, what would you rate a craving out of 10? Okay, most guys would say it's a 2 or a 3 or maybe a 4 at max. In other words, it's really not that big of a deal. Don't let yourself get tricked into thinking that you're dying. All right. Second, remember that this is not going to last. It's going to pass. All right. Just remind yourself that this thing is not going to be going on forever. It's just a tiny spike of discomfort that's going to leave soon, especially if you just go and do something else. And then third, which is perhaps the most powerful part of this mindset, is that you want to see the discomfort of a chemical craving as a good thing. All right. This discomfort is the feeling of the addiction leaving your body and your brain healing. All right. Think about it. Okay. All the negative brain changes driven by porn are the result of excess pleasure. Okay. When you're an active porn user, your brain, it sends this craving and then it would get pleasure in return. And it's like that feedback loop of, sending a craving, getting lots of pleasure. That's what trains your brain to keep asking for it. But what if instead, when your brain sends that trigger to use porn, you don't act on it? Well, what do you experience? You experience discomfort. And then your brain starts thinking, each time I ask for porn now, instead of getting pleasure, I'm just getting discomfort. Maybe I should stop asking for it. And that's actually what happens. The discomfort actually drives this rewiring process in your brain. So just like with working out, the discomfort is actually driving the positive effect. Like when you're in the gym, you're breaking down a muscle. Yeah, there's discomfort. You're actually aiming for a certain level of discomfort, or you're not actually getting any stronger. Okay. And in fact, dealing with a craving is easier than working out because you don't even need to go do anything. Okay. With a craving, you just need to sit back and let it flow through you. Remember, this is the feeling of porn leaving your body. So now on to something a little bit trickier. All right. Emotional cravings. How are we going to respond to these? Well, as we've said, an emotional craving is driven by some deeper negative emotion, right? And we're going to develop a very robust tool set for solving and even preventing emotional cravings, as they are probably the most challenging part of quitting porn that guys struggle with the most. But I'm going to give you the basics here. At the core, we just need to identify the unmet desire that's creating the emotional discontent and put that desire at ease. Until that desire feels like it's properly understood and accounted for, it'll keep trying to grab the wheel of your mind and steer you toward porn so it can get relief. So for example, say you're tired from working and you want a break. All right, if you just try to barrel through that desire for rest, you might find yourself walking into a relapse on autopilot in a moment of weakness. And this is due to that whole split mind problem that we've talked about in a previous lesson. Likewise, if you've got some kind of important task that you've been procrastinating on, as that stress, worry, and self-frustration mount, you'll be tempted to use porn to take the edge off. And if you want to cut the craving off at the knees, take care of the dang problem. Go get the thing done. Go get started on it. Or at least make a plan for how you're going to do it so that that part of you can stop sending off alarm bells saying, hey, this thing we want, it's not happening. There's a problem here. And that's what creates all the stress that drives the escapism. So we just have to address it, do the thing, or put a plan in motion to do it. And that's kind of a key distinction, is that you don't need to actually solve all of this stuff on the emotional level. That all that needs to happen is the part that's upset needs to feel like it's understood and like things are being taken care of, basically. And like I mentioned before, learning how to handle emotional cravings is the most important part of the work of quitting porn in a sustainable manner. And for many guys, this isn't exactly a small project because the negative emotions that drive their porn use are connected to big issues. Heck, many times guys aren't even aware of what these issues are because they've been stuffing them down for so long. So if your negative emotions are driven by loneliness, discontent with your work, relationship issues, or deep-seated mindset problems, then you're going to have to make a significant lifestyle shift. But I believe that is a good thing. This is why porn is the rite of passage for the modern man. It's a problem that demands you actually get your life in order, right? In fact, the bulk of the rest of this program is going to be primarily dedicated to helping you install the basic systems that will help you do this from the inside out. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Really, all we got to do is, if we find an emotional craving, do our best to try and respond to it the best we can, okay? And if you need more stuff, well, then just keep following this program, and we're going to install a full operating system that's going to cut all your biggest pains off at the knees, and it's going to help you live a life that you do not want to escape from. And this brings us now to responding to sexual cravings. Now, remember how I said previously the classic advice of doing math problems or push-ups is not a good response to chemical cravings? Well, this is where, it actually kind of works for sexual cravings. Basically, true sexual energy is relatively easy to transmute. In fact, it's totally natural for a man to transmute his sexual energy. Think about it. In nature, if a male is filled with the desire to mate, well, what does he typically have to do? Well, he's got to get out there, he's got to compete, and he's got to attract females, right? Some males, like bucks or rams, they literally got to go smash their heads against each other. Some birds need to go build an attractive nest and do an enticing dance. Some, need to migrate hundreds or even thousands of miles to get their chance to pass on their genes. And humans are wired the same way. Your hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't just get sex given to them. He had to go and develop competence or daring, proving that he could provide and protect in order to attract a woman. Whether that meant being able to hunt good game, raid an enemy village, or do something else useful, he had to prove his worth. So what I'm really getting at here is that your sexual energy as a man can be directed in two different directions, either toward an actual female in terms of courtship and reproduction, or it could be directed toward the acquisition of status that would increase your masculine value to women and your dependence. So if you're dealing with sexual cravings, honor that part of you and do the work to attract a woman's interest. Work out, make money, socialize, date, and generally build an attractive character in life that a woman would want to take part in. All right. And this holds true whether you're single or already married. And in fact, it's equally important to both. And heck, even if you want to stay single, you still have a sexual component and you want to be a high value man. I almost hate that word with all the connotation connected to it, but every guy wants to feel like his status represents his ambition and desires inside of himself. But the thing to notice here is that when you're dealing with true sexual desires, you can absolutely use that energy to do hard things. We just want to make sure that's actually what you're dealing with and not some chemical or emotional craving that needs a much more nuanced touch. And when you're still rebooting your brain, it might be very difficult to transmute your sexual energy cleanly because it's so enmeshed in the emotional and chemical issues of porn. But by completing a 90-day reboot, one of the greatest benefits is actually gaining access to your true sexual energy that you can begin harnessing for living your best life. Beyond healing your brain and leaving porn behind, regaining the ability to cleanly transmute sexual energy is one of the major sources of the no-fap superpowers that many guys often report after quitting porn. So there you have it. You now have a basic understanding of the 3 types of cravings for porn. You know how to identify them, and you also have a clear strategy for overcoming them. We've covered a decent amount of content in this video, so if you want a summary of it all, you want some exercises to drive it home, which are very important, and you want additional tools to help you in this process, then make sure you click the link below and view this lesson with the full porn quitting guide on markqueppet.com. Also, this is where you'll be able to work with me as your coach and mentor, helping you get through this challenge as efficiently and easily as possible. So I hope you found this useful, and I really look forward to seeing you all in the next lesson. Ooh-yah.